Off to a rocky start. Welcome to this afternoon's panel discussion, Turning Commitment to Achievement. I'm your moderator for today, Deborah Ford, dramaturg, director, writer, arts administrator, and unabashed boat rocker. Before we get started, Tisri Dunia is committed to social justice for all. I want to invite Zachary Couture, who is coordinating these wonderful panels, to come in and share with us Tisri's commitment to the indigenous peoples of this land. Zachary?
Hi, everyone. So just as a representative of Tisri, I want to give the following land acknowledgement. Tisri Dunia Theater is committed to engaging our community in dialogue at the intersection of socio-political issues and art. It would be hypocritical to discuss imperial violence in any form without first talking about the colonial violence perpetuated by our settler state, Canada, here on Turtle Island. Tisri Dunia Theater creates and operates in Tiohtià:ke on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people. We're the rightful custodians of these lands, waters, and resources. We are deeply saddened by the history and ongoing legacy of colonialism and remain committed to fighting for Indigenous rights and sovereignty as key guiding principles to decolonization and reconciliation. We intend this land acknowledgement to openly explore our responsibilities to address the generations of colonial violence that is the legacy of being settlers on this land. We encourage everyone to further educate themselves on the historical and current colonial forces that have and continue to shape our present-day life across Turtle Island, and to take action to support Indigenous anti-colonial struggles across Turtle Island and to return unceded lands. These actions include stopping the development of pipelines, making efforts to end the war on Indigenous women, and ensuring no more Indigenous children are ever stolen or murdered again by acting upon the 94 calls to action put forth by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As such, we would like to invite everyone to take a moment to acknowledge and or reflect on the rightful custodians of the land that they are currently located in. We encourage you to look up this information if you're not currently aware. And let us begin by learning and acknowledging our relationship with colonial violence together.
Thank you so much, Zachary. All right. When I started out in social development, I attended a workshop once that talked about what it takes to be able to do this work. And what the speaker described was the characteristics that form a pyramid of effective social development: patience, tenacity, creativity. Today, I have the pleasure of chatting with three people who embody these characteristics. If you have not already done so, you can read their bios, which are posted to the Tisri Dunia website. I encourage you to visit the site as it is aesthetically on point and so much is going on right now. Let's get back to those characteristics. Imagine, if you will, putting all of everything you've got into going after your dream job, jumping all the incredible hurdles involved. And as you go to cross the finish line, someone sidelines you, not because of something you do, but because of something you have to wear. Imagine having the tenacity it takes not to pick up and go somewhere else where you can be your authentic self, but to dig in and fight for the right to do so where you are. Imagine no more. Noor Farhat, come on in and would you tell us a bit about your experience in this area? Hey there, Noor.
Hi, thank you so much for this amazing introduction. So I'm a lawyer. I am a lawyer in criminal and constitutional law. I did a master's degree in criminal law to become a crown prosecutor in Quebec. However, since the adoption of Bill 21, which is the act respecting the laicity of the state of Quebec, I do not have the right to work as a lawyer in the government of Quebec in any capacity because I wear a religious symbol. What is Bill 21? Bill 21 is a law that prohibits the wearing of religious symbols by state officials, such as judges, crown prosecutors, police officers, and even teachers. Bill 21 invoked the notwithstanding clause in accordance with Section 33 of the Charters of Rights and Freedom. allowing the provincial government to override the rights and freedom in the charter for a period of 5 years. In passing this law, the government of Quebec has engaged in a democracy of public display, responding to the majority at the expense of the minorities.
And really having real world impact on people like yourself, right? Who studied so hard, who did everything they were told they had to do. And now there's one thing that you have no control over, because let's be honest here, we're not talking about a choice of, well, it's just a piece of cloth, I'll take it off. We're talking about your identity as an individual and your commitment to what you do. All right, let's bring some more people in here. Next, I want you to imagine a battle, getting into a battle for justice, where you know going in, it may be years before you see justice won, or even worse, have it escape you. Now, imagine that's not just one battle, but it's your life work. Today, I'm chatting with a man I believe to have the patience of Job. Phonemi, please tell me, how do you find the fortitude to keep pushing against things that are so slow to yield?
Hi there. So thanks very much for inviting me, and thank you for addressing a very, very important questions. You know, some of us are existentialists by trade. We don't believe in God, but we believe in the supremacy and the resilience of humanity and human being. So just like Sisyphus, we have to push the boulder up the mountain every day, every week, every year, and the boulder will roll down, and we'll keep pushing and pushing until we achieve what we are as human beings made out to do. And because we're human beings, we do care about other human beings, especially when we see pain, we see suffering, we see injustice, and we see marginalization. So that's why to me, it's so much part of what we do, who we are, and what we're meant to do. I think it's part of having a purpose in life, as more than just a profession or vocation, but a sense of purpose, a sense of not only who we are, but why we are and why we are here and what we can do for others and with others, because doing and working with others as much as we can is always a challenge. And I think that keeps me going through the years, and particularly during pandemic times. I think when we see a lot of people who are suffering, people being isolated, particularly the seniors in those isolated homes, and we know that we're privileged, so we have to do something in order to lessen the suffering and the pain that others live through.
I'm glad you invoked the image of Sisyphus. I thought of that myself when I was thinking about the work you did, but sometimes it's like we don't want to say that because people think, oh, then I don't want to do it. But yes, sometimes you just apply your shoulder to the stone and hope that you can get it there, right? Imagine now, everyone, that someone could give you a toolbox that you could use to awaken hearts and minds, that can support a better understanding of what it is to support a better understanding of what was, so that you could foster a better version of what could be. Charles Bender, come on in and tell us what it's like to play with that toolbox.
Ndio awetsi ashkinonia yes wendat endi yanionia hiwagi tiokutan Charles Bender yatsi jodiaki indari. I live in Montreal. I'm Charles Bender. I'm from the Wendat Nation, and I have a theater company called Production Menuentagwan. And what we strive to do with that theater company is have as many people from different horizons meet both in a rehearsal space and in the public as we do our shows. We truly believe that the strength of performance arts, theater in this case, is gathering all these people together, living a catharsis together, and get to communicate, get to talk to one another, get to meet one another. And even though we do broach difficult subjects, subjects that make some people uncomfortable, obviously, such as racism, such as isolation, such as, anyways, you see where I'm going with this. We try to do it with as much laughter as possible, as much fun as possible, to create a space where we can go through these issues, which with these very heavy issues, with as much lightness as possible, and then let it roll into something deeper as we talk together afterwards. Menwen Tagwan means, to give you an idea, means it's good. It also means let's have tea together so we get to know each other better. And this is what we strive to do when we do performances. We always have people stay behind afterwards so that we can actually talk not only about the issues that we tackled in the play, but about so many different things. In one of the shows, we literally did a healing circle for people that came to see a show about residential schools. And it was a wonderful moment. People really appreciated the moment to talk on that subject and how they felt about it and what they'd learned about it in the case of people that were non-Indigenous and were learning about it or feeling it for the first time. So that's basically what I do.
Lovely, thank you. You said something really key for me in there in terms of the work, the questions that we're debating, the issues that we confront can lead to some really dark places. And it's so important to be able to feed ourselves by finding that light and pulling it out every once in a while. So as we start out, what I'd like to ask you is, today's focus, of course, is turning commitment into achievement. And so where do those two meet for you? Charles, you want to give a start?
Yeah, because I'll go on with what I was just saying. I'll give an example of something that we did. We produced a play. The first play we produced as a company was called Mouliats, which basically says Montreal, but as an Innu Montagnais would pronounce it, one of the First Nations here in Quebec. And it's basically a story about a brother that decides to leave the community because he doesn't feel like he belongs to that community because he's part white and part Indigenous. And his brother is always telling him that he's a lesser human being because of that, and he feels like he doesn't belong to the community. Decides to let go of his identity as an Indigenous man, move to the city, and just be part of like the wider mass, where you get a sense sometimes that there are so many differences in Montreal that you can sort of disappear in it. But that backfires, obviously, because once he gets there, he meets people that are more interested in what he is than who he is. With no ill intentions. So it creates some quiproquos. It creates a lot of really funny situations. And in the end, it creates this moment where we get to own who we are so that we can better relate to others and others better learn how to relate to us once we've owned up to what we are, what we can share about us, and then we're going to move on to something else. So that's the basic premise of the play. Our intention by doing this play was also to go and tour Quebec so that we could go close to communities and have as many people in the theaters that were both Indigenous and non-Indigenous in places where these two communities don't necessarily talk a whole lot. And that was a great success. And one time we were in Baie-Comeau, and Baie-Comeau is a place where, there's a community, there's Pessamit, that's not too far from Baie-Comeau. In Baie-Comeau, you have a lot of students coming from Pessamit that will go to the CEGEP and the high schools there. And some of them say that they don't always feel comfortable. There's a sense of racism or not from everyone, obviously, but sometimes they don't feel like they belong to that space. So it was great to have all these people together in that theater. And when we did the Menwen Tagwan part of our performance, people, instead of asking us questions, as you would get in a Q&A, and often, it would end up being something along those lines. People would treat it as a Q&A. We'd talk about, the creative process and so on and so forth. People in the room started talking to one another, and literally the Pessamit community started inviting people over for dinner from Baie-Comeau and vice versa. So we're like, okay, so now we've done it. We've really created that link. People are really talking to one another, and people will get to learn who they are and own who they are in close proximity. So that was when one of our intentions really got what we wanted to do with it. The fact that we worked so hard on that play really allowed us to achieve this moment of communion between people that didn't know each other before that.
For you, especially considering the level of, I'm going to use this word, rejection you faced, what is it taking you to keep this commitment and hang in here? What's that end goal, and what's feeding that commitment to you? Rather than, pick up and go to Toronto, for instance, where you're not going to have this issue. You've decided to dig in. What's underneath that commitment for you? Sorry, Noor, I don't know if you heard that I was directing that at you. Yeah.
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
We were
didn't-
talking about commitment and achievement.
Yes.
And given the situation you're in, where, like I said, you've done everything you're supposed to do,
Yeah.
you are, the poster child for, that achievement,
Yeah.
and you've had it ripped away from you. You've decided to commit yourself here to achieve what? First of all, what is the commitment you're making? What is that costing you? And what is it you're hoping to achieve?
It's really a difficult question because it's still a work in progress for me to exist in this system that is systematically rejecting me. It's really difficult to be living in this daily, and I think what I think it's the achievement in this kind of situations is that when you occupy spaces and systems that weren't built for you, your existence and your commitment to exist as your true self, this is the achievement. And this is the achievement for me. And this was the only achievement for me since the beginning of everything that has happened since I was a lawyer. God knows how hard it is to stay true to yourself, to your identity, to your values, to what you think is true and right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think being your radical self in this system is the achievement. And this is for me, like, if you ask me what is my achievement and what I want to achieve, is staying true to myself in this system that is trying to, showing me the door.
I understand.
Yeah.
So she's used a word a couple of times that I think is important here: system. Often when we talk about social development and social justice, we're focusing on hearts and minds. Systems don't have empathy. Systems don't have, hearts and minds. And we have a government who says there's no systemic problems. So how do you hold that commitment to knowing, this is what's underlying my work. This is the thing I need to change. This is the thing I need to achieve. How do you hold on to that vision when the voices outside of that are saying, oh, no, that's not real. That's not happening. That's not a problem. How do you do that?
Well, one way of doing it is basically to present and show the face of the people who experience systemic racism or systemic discrimination, and let them speak, create that personal public narrative. Because people, the rest of the country, the rest of society has to know that these people exist and they experience discrimination at different levels, especially in terms of systemic racism. I must say that we're still very fortunate to live in a federal system where the federal government recognizes systemic racism, where the local government, the city of Montreal, recognizes systemic racism. It's just the present provincial government doesn't. But we can still make a lot of, shall we say, concrete change at the federal level and at the local level when it comes to combating systemic racism. I also often point out the fact that, systemic discrimination is recognized in Quebec law. And the first article of the Pay Equity Act of Quebec refers to systemic discrimination, and the words are there. So it just shows that it's systemic discrimination based on gender, on disability, on other grounds it's recognized, except when it comes to race and ethnic or national origin. And this is why we need to constantly engage in certain intellectual debates. But we prefer to look at ways to fight it out in the courts and in the administrative justice systems, because this is where we're going to see possibly change coming faster. I need to draw the attention to the fact that gay marriage in this country was not fought in the legislature. It was fought through the courts, and it was the courts that recognized gay marriage, and that's, and among other things, discrimination based on sexual orientation eventually was read in the Canadian Charter through legal action from a person in Alberta. So we still live in a system where there's a division of powers between legislative, executive, and judicial branches. So there are ways to advance the notion of systemic racism in order to fight it, very likely through the judicial system.
I want to continue down this path a little bit, because you just said something that I think is important, that there are levers that we can use. And sometimes I think we forget that we can apply to these levers. I started out in this world quite some time ago. And you were one of the people who were leading the charge. I think at the time you were at the Human Rights Commission, and you seeded in me a love for this work. And actually, I have to thank you because it took me on the world tour through the UN. But I'm at an age where I can look back and see how far we've come in a relatively short time, right? But we live in a time of instant gratification. So how do we now see that the fortitude needed for this work in the next generation of advocates? How do we do that, Fo, when people want it yesterday?
I think it's essential that when we work on human rights, we have to keep in mind that the human rights is a term that has two words, human and rights. And the problem, I see it sometimes as a problem, is that too often we focus on the rights from an intellectual, from the legal, from an abstract point of view, and if we forget about the human side of it. And the human side of it requires that we go down on the ground where people are in their housing, social housing units, in classrooms, in the workers' halls and union halls, and talk about human rights. We have to go where people are so as to better connect to understand, because often when we fight systemic discrimination, it's just not about just race. It's about gender and class intersecting. And disability is becoming a major issue. And I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, if not now, age-based discrimination is going to be a very, very big priority, because a lot of people are getting into their 50s and 60s, still having to work to make ends meet. And, looking for a job at the age of 50, 55 is no longer easy. And that's what we need to talk about. So we have to look at it multidimensionally, intersectionally, and to understand the interconnectedness between these different realities and dimensions of the human person and the human community.
Nor one of the things, as we're talking about now, is the importance of being able to apply over a long time. Sometimes it takes quite some time for this to happen. And in the case of what happened with Bill 21, we saw a lot of people, tuning in, getting involved before it became legislation. We saw quite the dip after it became legislation, kind of like, oh, it's done, there's nothing we can do about it. And then we saw a rise again when we saw the first example of the school teacher, right?
Yeah.
So how do you keep that momentum needed to keep this issue going when, especially in justice, there are so many people crying out for justice? How do you keep focused in the area you need to keep it moving?
That's the thing, a fundamental part of anti-racism is leaning into this discomfort of unlearning our biases. And this process takes years and years. So I think the danger that we have with this age of instant gratification is the performative activism. So some causes have been reduced to engagement in social media and element of entertainment sometimes. And I can only think as a notable example of what happened on Instagram after the murder of George Floyd, when the hashtag Black Lives Matter and Blackout Tuesday took over Instagram. And Instagram was filled with millions and millions of black squares, replacing important information about the movement that have been shared by people who were on the sites, important sites, under those hashtags. So most people were posting black squares. They were simply trying to show the support, to show that we're aware that this is happening and we care about this. But people were just posting this to assure their followers that we support this movement.
I'm down, yeah.
Exactly, and I did it. But then they weren't doing the work to actually support the movement.
Absolutely.
And information was lost.
Yeah.
So this is a danger of being into the performance of activism.
Charles, there's an angle in this for theater that I find very interesting. Many theater companies and whatnot are reliant on public funds and jury decisions. And there is this push in theater of the new and different. Let's do the new and different. Let's do the new and different. And social justice is one of those areas that requires us to keep pushing at the same. So how do you balance that in terms of this cry for the new, different, cutting edge theater, and still wanting to remain focused in those areas of social justice and that kind of thing without being penalized in that jury system?
I'd have a hard time talking to the juries. I mean, I've done so many juries for so many different councils. And what happens, and I know that this is a problem for these councils, is that when they start building those juries to make sure that they have a good representativity, and that's fairly new, you know, they've realized that, you know, often it would be easy for juries to be one-sided. So now they're trying to have as much representativeness on those juries. Thing is, and oh my God, it's going to take so long to unpack that whole thing. But because you weren't represented on stage, because you didn't see yourself as an Indigenous person or a racialized person or a handicapped person or a differently abled person on stage, you probably didn't figure that that would be a career you'd go into. So the basin of people that are practitioners is actually fairly small. So what you end up doing, and I remember women saying the same thing about the women's liberation movements and equity movements of the 80s and 90s, and being asked to be sitting on so many different panels and so many different councils and so on and so forth to keep the thing rolling. But in the meanwhile, you're not taking care of your own needs, your own career, your own family, your own wishes and your own desires, right? So there's this balance there that's really complicated to keep. And I lost the original idea I wanted to state because I spoke too long on the jury aspect of it.
Talking about that push for new and different.
Yes, the push for new and different. Basically, when we started the company, we knew as Indigenous people that, you know, it was in l'air du temps. You know, something was going on. People wanted to know more about Indigenous people. Funding was coming our way. So, you know, all the cards were stacked for us to have a great game, but we knew that hand would pass. It's what happens literally every time. So our objective was not to change the world. Our objective is not to say like we're determined, we have like a 20-year plan to build the company. Well, we do have a
strat plan,
ambitions for the company, but ideally the thing we need most to do is put our foot in the door. Is just to say like we've put the foot in the door. I'm already 46, so I'm not going to be there forever. So what I'm doing right now is I'm putting my foot on the door where I'm invited and calling the young ones and go in as fast as you can, so that when the door shuts back down, because we're no longer, you know, relevant in what is new and interesting, you'll already be inside and you'll already be changing things. And you'll be there not because, you know, there's a call for Indigenous people to occupy that space. There's a call for racialized people to call that space or whatever. You're there because you're there and you're staying there because you've developed the competencies, you've created links, you've created a family in there, and we can't turn back now. We can't change back. When I'm going to be gone, 2 people are going to have replaced me in that space. So I'd say how you work against the push for something new and original, you can't really do that. You just have to be pragmatic, use that momentum, get in there and get people that are going to keep changing those things in the future.
We're talking about change a little bit here, and I have to share with you, earlier I heard you said you came from Quebec City. And I had a recent experience in Quebec City that I was actually quite surprised by. I was visiting the city and staying in a hotel, and I'm a smoker. Yes, I know, bad girl. And I had to go out of the hotel to be able to smoke. And the hotel was on a rather busy street corner. And, going out several times during the day at different times of day and night, I was actually surprised to see the lack of diversity in the world walking by. In Montreal, you can't, the reality is when you walk down the street, that's what I love about my city, you see the world. But that wasn't the experience in Quebec City. And it kind of made me clue into a bit of the dialogue, of the perspective of what's going on in terms of people not understanding my perspective. So many of my fellow Quebecers do deny my own lived experience of discrimination. And so if they don't get to see it firsthand, the question I have is, how do I reach them and get them to understand this, to build an empathy around it when they're insulated from the experiences that would bring that understanding? So the same thing with you. You deal with, a lot of cases where people, the narrative around them is, look at this bad person, they deserve whatever happened to them. And in some way, we take solace in that position, because then it means it could never happen to me. So how do you break through that and really get people to understand the perspective of the other to make change? Anyone who wants to jump in, please jump in on this one. So, sorry, I think I've made that very, very wide for you all.
One way to do it, basically to draw the comparison and draw the links. For example, you talk about blaming the victim. You may recall in the 70s, that logo, scream quietly or your neighbors will hear. Basically, the thing that said about the domestic abuse, telling a lot about battered wives, in the sense that you're the victim, but maybe you deserve it. Scream quietly and don't disturb it. So now we're doing the same thing towards victims of racism. Scream quietly or don't disturb us because you're giving us a bad rep. Some years ago, I was working in terms of anti-gay hate crimes, and I've been told that apparently in the gay village, there were a lot of hate incidents. And a lot of people were told not to go too public about it because it could hurt gay tourism. It could give the area a bad rap. So when you draw the comparison between different forms of hate, discrimination, and oppression, people understand. People understand what is it to be stigmatized 2-3 times over, or reverse stigmatization. And so we always have to, without going into too much into victimization, we have to bring out the real experience, the real life, the real living experience or lived experience of the people, and say that, let's take away from all these stigmas and labels and just see people for what they are, who they are, and what they lived through. So, to bring it back to, as I mentioned earlier, to that human connection, because regardless of race or background or class or age and everything else, in many ways, we have the same blood color, we have the, same figment of the human DNA. And a lot of people will eventually see the light. But I want to bring out something that we live in the high-tech world, we live in a global village. Younger people of all ages now are capable of adapting to technologies and new information and new ways of new knowledge and new ways of doing things. And we still can't learn how to get rid of our human biases. It's something to think about, right? And that's why we should never lose, shall we say, sight of who we are and what we can be as the part of this sea of humanity.
As a storyteller, of course, I like to believe that that storytelling, you can build empathy for change. But Charles, I want to come to you on this question too, because it seems to me, we heard about the discovery of the graves that the children were buried in. We hear these moments, we have these flash moments of awareness, but it doesn't feel to me like that awareness is turning into something bigger than that. Even when it comes to, things like land acknowledgement, there's a sense of a performativeness, like, okay, we've done it, now we've done our part, and we can go back to what we were doing. So I wonder what you think about that.
I don't think things can change in a flash. We have a tendency to think that, it takes so long for things to change. But, when you put it in perspective, our life expectancy is about 80 years old, so as an average. In the course of the whole humanity, it's such a small moment. It's really possible that all the efforts you're putting into it, you're not going to see change right away. It's going to be by increments. It's going to be slow. It's going to be, so you might as well try to have, and I speak from a theater perspective in this case, obviously. You might as well have as much fun doing it as you're doing it. And I want to go back to what you were mentioning on how do you convey the sense of your otherness, or all the obstacles that you perceive that other people might not perceive because they don't have your unique experience. That's where theater comes in. That's where good television or good movies or good books, good art comes in. That's how you convey from an empathic perspective what it feels like, the main issues. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of cultural appropriation, of misrepresenting people in those medias. That's why there's such a reflection right now of going like, okay, stop. If I actually absolutely want to talk about Indigenous issues in a project, in an arts project, maybe I should have an Indigenous person in it. Maybe I should have, and I mean, it goes without saying that some people did it before without second thinking and just going like, I'm going to use it as a parabole. I'm going to use it as
a norm.
and I'm gonna bring people's attention on that because I think that's terrible. But yeah, let us speak to that, or don't use us as a sounding board for another idea you had in mind. You're probably gonna miss the mark, and you're gonna hurt marginalized people more. But now people are being more conscious of that, and that's where I think more and more media used to be hurtful or used to miss the mark, and more there's an actual reflection being put into representing things in a more honest and a more authentic light, which will allow us to come closer to empathy and make people understand what it really feels like to be in this situation and share this experience and share it through the beauty of you know, a fun narrative, a beautiful painting, great images. I mean, it's fun, it's great. Let's do it. Let's enjoy it, but let's do it authentically and let's do it honestly. And I kind of veered off your question there, so I'm really sorry about that.
It's all right. That's what we're about today, is just exploring. Noor, honey, one of the things we like to believe is that the criminal justice system is a fair system. As soon as we get out of the crib, though, we start seeing, some people start seeing that that's not necessarily true. So, you know, there's no question that being the little brown child born in 1965, growing up in Laval, I was aware of racism at a young age. But when it comes to the criminal justice system, where I became aware of just how vulnerable I was when a young man named Anthony Griffin was accused of stiffing a cab driver on a $27 cab fare. And a constable shot him in the head as he had surrendered. How do I get a system that is not supposed to have empathy or anything else? That's the reality of what happened. How do I get people to see that this kid didn't deserve this? How do I get the system to see that no matter what he did, taking his life, and that the damage that the system that's done to the system when we don't acknowledge that? How do I change that, considering this happened to Anthony Griffin when I was a teenager and it's still happening? How do I make a difference here?
I will respond to your question by a question. If Anthony Griffin was a white man, would he be alive today? Absolutely. Statistically, yes. And he might be watching us today. The problem with how people are perceiving systemic racism or systemic discrimination is that as long as I'm not concerned, it is not my issue. When we hear a story of sexual assault, Indigenous women being murdered, you know what? It's not my community. It's not me. It's not my problem. Like, I have to focus on my own future. It is not my business. Maybe she deserved it if she was raped. Maybe I don't know. I have to hear two sides of the story. Like, people are so prone to excuse the behaviors that are systematically racist, and I'm sorry for my English. When Black men are not safe from the police, when Indigenous women are continuously murdered, when Muslim women cannot have jobs and are hate crimed because of a law, it is not a punctual racism. It is not something that happens once in a while. It is a systemic racism. It is a system that is racist. And we, like the Premier of Quebec, doesn't want to recognize that. He doesn't even want to recognize that we have systemic racism in Quebec.
Yeah. So here's the thing, though, as we talk about this, is that yes, there are people who, are absolutely supportive of that, negative racism. It's not an accident that's happening. By and large, my experience though is that's not the situation. What I find harder is, social apathy, social paralysis. It runs rife in the face of feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of work that needs to be done around racism. So what I'm going to ask you all is, you're talking to a young person. They're thinking about their life in the future and what they want to do with their lives. What is the payoff for engaging? What is the thing you're going to say to that young person? Come on in here. We know it's a Sisyphean task. We know that, the money's not there. We don't do it for the money. What is it you're saying to that young person to say, come on into this tent? What's the attraction? Oh, because, of all people, I think you carry the weight in a different way. So what's that payoff you're telling young people now?
I talk to young people every day, and I always talk to them first about issues, values, principles, visions, identities, goals, dreams, not technical legalistic stuff and or stuff you see in Facebook, here today, gone in 2 minutes, but talk about who they are, who they want to be, why they should be who they want to be, and how they should be who they want to be. Because I think engaging with young people, we have to be at where they are, depending on, of course, a person's race, class, ability, sexual identity. Because once you to talk to people, I think you need to relate and to be where they are, so that they can understand that it's a conversation as opposed to talking down or giving them a lecture or, teaching them things that they're not ready for. And it takes time. It takes patience, it takes trust, it takes empathy. Sometimes it takes a little bit of love, and love can come in different way. And so we have to show the ability to show love. And believe it or not, we have to show affection, we have to show feelings, so that when I think young people or less than young people, when they see that you're real, you're authentic, that you're genuine, and you truly believe in what you do because you have dreams, visions, and ideals, and that they can have the same thing too in order to become a better person, I think you have them on board. And so that's why, look at in my work here, each year we get about 40 or 50 law students and political science interns. Why do they come here? Because this is where not only they learn skills and knowledge, but also I think in a sense they can actualize, they can achieve self-actualization, how to become a better citizen, how to be a better future lawyer, a better, citizen of the world.
Yeah. Nor, how about you? How do you encourage young people to go into law at this point when they're coming into a system that is going to be hostile to them if they are an other in any way, right? So what are you telling them in terms of, there's a payoff in here for you? What's the payoff?
I think I'll be lying if I say that it is not overwhelming. It is overwhelming, but I think it is the right thing to do. And it does take, and I'm talking really from a place of like a lot of feelings. I'm still into the battle of Bill 21. I have a lot of feelings. I'm really sensitive about this topic. So it takes a toll on you, but it will shape you in ways that you cannot imagine. But you need others. You cannot do it by yourself. You need others. You need to fight with others. You cannot fight by yourself. And this is something that our society, the individualism that we live in, we think that, okay, you know what, I will do it by myself and I can do it by myself, but we cannot do it by ourselves.
Absolutely. Charles, I had a teacher when I was in school. He started first year lectures always in the same way, and I believe he's still doing it, saying to students, if you came into this field to get rich, get out now. Right? And he would say, theater is a dying art. I don't know what you're doing here. Now, you and I share a passion with a belief that, theater can has its role in changing the world. Tisri Dunia changed the world one play at a time. But, there's no money. There's, there is no star system for us. So what are you saying to young people when you say, come on into theater? What are you saying to them in terms of, if you do this, your life will be, what is it? What's the payoff?
Oh, what's the payoff? I mean, you do something you love. That's it. That really is it. And to go back to the question you were asking before, how do you convince young people to get in there if on top of it, they'll have to carry a certain amount of militancy or a certain amount of, barrier breaking? It's a lot of hard work. It's going to be discouraging for a lot of people. And I was thinking about it because I never really thought in those terms. But one of the things that would tell young people that gets into it is, remember that you're not only defined by that battle. What's going to happen once you'll get in there? You will have to carry that battle, but remember that amongst the battles you'll be, in between all those battles you'll have to fight, you'll find someone who's as big of a fan of Star Trek as you are, and you're coming from two completely different perspectives, and that's fine. You love crochet, and the next person loves crochet as well. So much the better. The fight can still be fought, but you're fighting this fight by knowing that you have a strong connection with that person that did not understand you originally. And this is what's going to be fun. And you're going to get to explore and live something that you enjoy, that you're passionate about, through somebody else's perspective as well. And that person is going to be brought to do the same with you. And this is what theater is all about. The reason we lock ourselves into rehearsal space for months at a time to try to figure out how we're going to tell this beautiful story is above and beyond all how we're going to interact with one another, how are we going to speak to one another, how are we going to be empathic to each other's characters and each other's identity, above and beyond all, because rehearsal space need to be safe spaces. They need to be open spaces where you can explore everything, always remembering that you do it out of respect, both for your passion, each other's passion, and respect for each other, because we are sharing that. So that's what I'd say. And I have this workshop, not workshop, but where we're trying to bring in young Indigenous students into the FTA, Festival Transamérique, to come and explore the world of performance arts. And we keep telling them, you don't have to be someone who wants to become an artist. If you don't want to be on stage, it's fine. If you're thinking of becoming a lawyer or working with numbers, it's fine. We need people who know the law, and we need people who know numbers. The only reason is, instead of working with, in a space where you might not have fun, because not saying that you can't have fun, but maybe you can do it with us, because we're all really crazy fun people in theater. So come be someone who uses your lawyer background or your comptabilité background or mediation background with a crazy bunch of theater people. You'll have fun. You're not going to make a lot of money, but you'll have a lot of fun. It's going to be very satisfying.
I think all of you are saying something that I connect to as well, because I often ask myself that now. I'm at the other end of my career, and I look back and I think, would I encourage a young person to come this way and that kind of thing? And I realize that it's a question of who you are. Fo, you were saying this about purpose. You do it because that is who you are. And if you did anything other than that, you wouldn't be as happy in your life. If I'm a lawyer, especially I think people of color understand this. You go into a career because that's where stability is. But there's still this piece of you that hungers, and the arts can play a role in that. I remember with my parents, when I told them I was going back to school, oh, that's wonderful, Deb, you're going back to school. What are you going to study? Theater for development. Oh, so how's the weather? That was the conversation, right? But I had to do it because that's who I was becoming, right? I do want to shift a little bit and bring current events into this, because something is happening right now that I think shines a light on a discrepancy that is significant. We talked about the levers of change, and one of the key levers of change available to people is protest and mobilization. What has been interesting to me recently is to see this gang of truckers, suspectedly backed by foreign money, and they're being tolerated as they lay siege to our nation's capital, and other cities and roadways. And it's interesting to see, because when it comes to mobilization protests around social development and social justice, there is this boot that comes down very quickly and seeks to stifle us. a great example of that is to just see what happens at the G7 and the G20. Sure, you can protest, but you'll have to do it a half mile away from the site. So what can we do as artists, as activists, what can we do to start leveling that playing field so that, because I have no doubt, if I had taken, 20 of my homies and put them in a truck, they'd have cleared our Black behinds out of there within a day, right? And I just want to be careful in saying that one of the things we recognize is that this group is a lot more diverse than we would suspect it of being. But we've seen the racism, we've seen the attacks, we've seen the damage to property, but yet everyone's treating them with kid gloves. How do we get that? Oh, I see you smiling. Come on in.
Yeah. Look, Frooks, I think a lot of police officers and politicians are just afraid of truckers. They're afraid of macho men with macho voices. Let's be honest. All right. So they're afraid. Secondly, I think there's also the fact that to a certain extent, I think Canadians are very patient. That they tolerate, they respect freedom of expression, dissent, and protest at the beginning. And when things do start to get a little bit difficult, people rise up. And the people who rise up are not truckers, are the people who are inconvenienced by the truckers, right? The people who can't sleep, can't go to work, who basically can't even watch a TV at night without the noise. So that's the power of the people. People need to rise up and basically to do that. Now, I think that one of the things that we have to understand that we live in a global village, and there's a lot of local people who are insecure, who feel that the force of global change is upon the doors and they can't control it. And I think we need to address those insecurities, because insecurities can lead to scapegoating and can lead to violence if we don't have a forum for constructive, at least open and peaceful dialogue. And, sometimes I think that our civil society leaders and political leaders don't have that skills or that ability to promote some sort of open dialogue in a constructive way. So maybe it leaves, it begs the question as to how do we address this kind of quote unquote uprising or insurrection in a country that's known for respect for peace, order, and good government. And we have to do it in such a way as not to put more fuel on the fire and to basically restore, among other things, civility and peaceful dialogue, even if we don't agree on anything. And those, again, I come back to the issue of values, question of principles and ways of doing things. And I think that more and more people have to speak out. Ordinary Canadians, I don't believe that they support insurrection. I don't think they support things that will damage the environment, damage peaceful, living, and then cost millions of dollars to the local and the national economy. So we have to bring out, I think artists have to articulate these, ordinary people's needs, and this, write songs, create songs to help people understand freedom can be looked at differently, and that song Rise Up, but we have to be more creative how we use the tools of art as a way to create a different kind of social movement.
You are so zen, my love. Charles, I don't know about you, but these truckers, for me, I think back to the Army coming in because a Gulf force was threatened. And yet, until we started seeing the financial impact, it seemed like they were ready to tolerate these truckers. What do you make of this particular example of, do you see a disparity there, and what do you attribute it to?
There is a disparity. Obviously, the first time the first thing you think about when you're seeing all those truckers assemble and carrying those flags and things like that, and you're talking about, you're thinking of the barricades at Oka and how that was treated versus how the truckers are treated. And you're seeing, they're talking about trucks with wheels taken off to create barricades. And that's exactly what happened. They took the wheels off so they'd be harder to create the barricades, and it was not treated at all the same way. I don't think if families wanted to get out of the convoy, and that's another thing, I don't think if families wanted to get out of the convoy and go back home, they'd get thrown rocks at, So that there's this thing that's scary, knowing that two ways of expressing two people expressing their voices or wanting to be heard by the government, and using strong pressure, going over there and with are not going to be treated the same. Definitely not the same. And it's the same thing with people protesting the pipelines. It's like, no, we're going to push you guys away because the trucks need to go through. And that's another thing that's like, come on, seriously. It's very unsettling. I don't know where this thing is going to. And you pointed the fact that there is a diverse crowd still, around that convoy. But it is very upsetting to know, as you're learning in the newspapers, that they are very well organized. It didn't come out of nowhere. There are people with military background and police background in that convoy that have made that camp very specifically sustainable, which was not always possible for other manifestations, indigenous manifestation, for example. People are well organized, but they're getting pushed through a lot easier. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I know I'm unsettled and a bit frustrated and scared. But I don't know to what extent I have an answer to your question yet.
Nor, how about you? In terms of our resident legal expert, although Fo's been doing the system so long, I'm sure he's got his expertise as well. Am I being sensitive here and seeing racism and systemic problem? Is there something in the law that would make what they do justifiable? And my group out doing Black Lives Matter, we're more of a risk. Is it what I think it is? And that's just that when whiteness shows up, that's not scary, but when others show up, it's scary. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said, and I will add to what Charles said. The state wouldn't handle it as peacefully if it was a BLM protest or indigenous people protesting pipelines. That's for sure. It has been 2 weeks, and we haven't seen any any government, we haven't seen the army, we haven't seen police officers asking people to go out. We have seen maybe a few tickets given there and there, but we haven't seen any, I'm honestly, as a lawyer, I'm shocked that the government still hasn't, the government hasn't done anything yet.
Do you think this is about a systemic racism problem, or do you think this is about a minority government problem?
I think this is what privilege looks like. And I think we would never hear such noise, both in the literal and figurative way, for people who are protecting the rights and the freedom of the marginalized, or people who are protecting the rights of indigenous people or the environment. I think we are seeing what is a protest when privileged people are taking over. This is what it looks like.
So I want to come back to you because when we examine these things, we examine it from the windows that we know. And you all, know that the game, as you were saying before, there's federal, there's provincial, so is there something we're missing here? Is there something we should be considering when we judge this situation?
Well, I think the current situation is very, very complex and multidimensional, and I think that I would not try to reduce it to any kind of. I will try not to compartmentalize it. But as I mentioned, and I'll be very consistent about this, is that yes, there's a freedom to protest, there's a freedom of expression, and I think we need to ensure the freedom of expression and protest are to be, protected from violence and state suppression. But once freedom begins where the other person's freedom ends. So we have to ensure that there's a mutual accommodation, mutual understanding. But I look at the situation, I agree that a lot of people can be anti-vax, and that's great. And it's good to have an opinion and to march for what you believe in. But then I look at the people the residents, I look at the workers, I look at the merchants, I look at the small business people, I look at those truckers who are vaccinated and who are part of the Canadian Truckers Alliance, who believe that, you know, there are ways to do things without creating havoc on the local economy and local way of life. So I think, you know, we got to look at these things from different angles. But more importantly, I believe that at any time you can disagree, but you cannot come to a situation where we're almost creating, we're seeing that escalating to the point where basically it's no longer a matter of quote unquote legitimate political discourse, to use an expression used by some Republicans regarding the January 6th insurrection. But we have to be aware that, you know, all those millions of dollars into these platforms from overseas, they must come from somewhere. Certainly not from those who want to keep peace, order, and good government in this country. And so, anyway, I don't want to go too far into that, but I do want to say, in terms of from a human rights perspective, is that human rights are not absolute. We need to balance it, because there are all kinds of people who need, and, you know, vulnerable people, people who, you know, who live from basically check to check, week by week. And if you don't have those jobs because of the truckers' protest, we have to think of those people. And we're like, those are the people who needs protection the most. So I hope that we will have come to common sense, but I do want to say something. I think Canadians are very patient and very, very, in a sense, very tolerant, because if these things were to take place in the United States, I tell you, the National Guard would be there in less than 24 hours to clean up the streets.
Absolutely, absolutely. Noor, you spoke earlier and brought something forward that I want to touch on. As a Canadian, one of the places I take a strong sense of my Canadian identity comes from the Charter of Rights, of the Human Rights and Freedoms, right? In particular, Section 5:1, every individual is equal before the law, before and under the law, and has the right to equal protection, equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular, without discrimination based on race, national ethnic origin, color, sex, age, mental or physical disability. For me, the use of the notwithstanding clause in the legislation for Bill 21, to me, undermined these words. It really made them like, what do they mean now? You know, this that I take my identity from. But more importantly, and I want to talk to bring you gentlemen in on this question as well, it also had a chilling effect on the idea of social justice movement. If you can get into the fight, move the fight far enough that you build that empathy, that you build the consensus you need, and then the majority can turn around and say, oh, notwithstanding, what are we doing? Are we getting into fights like, what does this mean for the future of advocacy in your perspective? And how will it affect your work? And in what ways will you bring this issue into your work? Noor, can we start with you?
I will start by saying, you know, the use of the notwithstanding clause is such a dangerous move by government. You know, it reminds me like a famous poem that says, you know, first they came for the socialist and I didn't speak out because I was not a socialist. And the poem ends with, then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. And this is the perfect like image for what is the notwithstanding clause. One violation of the rights guaranteed by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom is a violation for all the rights and freedom for everyone in all aspects of all our lives. So any person at any time can become part of a marginalized community. And like Fo said, like older people, like we're all becoming older and we will become part of a marginalized population and we will become a victim of discrimination. A person can suddenly become disabled, for example, and can experience discrimination based on their disability. So as long as systemic racism exists, the marginalized group will continue to be oppressed. And if Bill 21 is allowed to stay, this is a big door to the violation of human rights that will be wide open for the future. Because to be honest, I pleaded the case of Bill 21, and we have never seen since the adoption of the charter, the Canadian charter, the notwithstanding clause being used in this way to violate the rights of a group in this in this like careless way, like, okay, you know what, we don't give an F about like these people, we will violate their right, you don't have to work, and you know what, like do whatever you have to do. And we have never seen this.
I just want to be careful in saying that we have seen the notwithstanding clause applied, but it's usually done after the fact. It's not embedded in the legislation
Exactly.
itself.
And it's sometimes, you know what, it's usually used to protect the minorities, and it's usually used to protect marginalized groups against the majority. It's not
Right.
used against minority groups. And even though we have seen, the notwithstanding clause used in the law 101 for the French in Quebec, it wasn't used in the same way in Bill 21. It was really aggressive in
Yeah.
Bill 21, legally speaking.
Yeah, because it's built into the legislation. Fo, what do you think? Have we put our foot, has this legislation put its foot on the slippery slope that's going to undermine social development and social justice going forward? Or do you think that people like me are just being a little reactionary around it?
Well, we talk a lot about Bill 21 and the notwithstanding clause, but the bill has been adopted. It's no law, has been challenged in court. We'll see how much how far the challenge will go. But I would like to draw your attention to something else that should be discussed in a forum like this, which is Bill 96, which also uses the notwithstanding clause, because there are some very legitimate concerns that under Bill 96, Deborah, you and I, because of the notwithstanding clause in what's in the bill, you and I will be profiled. For example, we will be asked to show proof that we're part of the historic English-speaking community. So that's why I was saying to some people of color that have been here for generations, because you're people of color, or because you're whatever, and you may have to prove that you're not only that you're part of the historic English-speaking community, but you have to prove that your Jurassic roots. You have to go much further back in order to basically live up to the debates about who is an English-speaking person and so on and so forth. So the Bill 96, there's a lot of potential for, negative consequences for people of color, especially those who've been here for, way before your grandparents, my grandparents were born, but because of race, because of an ethnic background, there's always a question as to whether we are really English-speaking people. That this is how a lot of people feel. I can understand that concern, and I think we need to have a very, very critical race lens to look at these debates, because this is the need we talked earlier about the need to look at things beyond those silos and beyond the walls. And that's why I think that the focus should be more on the notwithstanding clause, Bill 96, and the implication for people of color like you in this province. And there are a lot of deep ramifications that have not been raised, because unfortunately the people of color who are English speaking have not been vocal enough about their concerns vis-a-vis this bill.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just about the bill, right? After we had the first referendum, we had a large wave of Anglophones get up and leave, and the rest of us kind of did, okay, we'll be quiet and they'll leave us alone. Just sit over here and be quiet. Don't make too much of a wave, and they'll leave us alone. It hasn't worked.
It all depends on how you see it. For example,
hold on, I'm just going to finish with Fo first, and I'll come to you, Noor. Go ahead, Fo.
For example, the decision of the government not to fund Dawson College because it has crying needs. There's a lot of racial implications for that, because you look at the student population with Dawson College, the very people who work there. I mean, the vast majority of many segments of that population are people of color. So there are implications. It depends on how we look at it. And that's why I think that, we need to have a conversation on different ways of looking at things, about doing things in this province that don't divide people along racial and ethnic lines with the power of the state behind it, and to be very open and honest about it, because I don't believe that Quebecers of any from any region want to have a divisive discourse or divisive set of policies that basically, deprive or prevent this province from achieving its full potentials.
Absolutely. Nor, go ahead, dear.
I just wanted to say a few words about the Bill 26. I think it's a horrifying bill. It's really scary. It's 100 pages of like violation of human rights, and it uses the notwithstanding clause. And I think that what happened with Bill 21, it was the slippery slope. Like the Quebec government used it the first time and saw that, you know what, all people are happy. Yes, they have a scapegoat. They have, you know what, people are responding well to this violation. And you know what, we'll do it again and people won't react. And seeing the Bill 96 after seeing Bill 21, it's honestly, as a lawyer, it's chilling. And I'm really scared for the future of Quebec when I see laws like these ones.
Charles, so far they've been very careful to say, yes, we're going to do this, but we're going to protect the Indigenous community. I think that's because that's the community where the focus is. And if they fought back, then, people would hear them. And what, based on what Noor was saying around Bill 2021 and now Bill 96, it seems to me that we're seeing a bit of American right-wing politics here in terms of the dog whistle being blown. They know there's a constituency that supports this. I'm coming up to a new election. I want to make sure I get elected again. Most Quebecers don't think of them as far right, but I'm sorry, the CAQ is quite to the right. So the fact that it's starting to work and they're getting away with some of this, do you have some concerns around this for your community?
Yes, obviously. And, the CAQ is not alone in that. I mean, what they're trying to do is rally the people from Bloc Québécois, obviously, who tried the exact same thing when they were in power before the CAQ came in. So there is this sense, and I do have to say, I often take the defense of the population of Quebec, the French population of Quebec in this sense, and for my community, my theater community in this case, because we're always part of more than one community. As an Indigenous actor, I'm also someone who's part of the wider theater community of Quebec. And a lot of the people in that community are afraid of losing the identity, the Quebec identity, the Francophone identity of what they cherish. So obviously that fear is shared by a lot of people in the rest of the province. And these tools are addressing or are feel like candy to the people that have those fears. It's like it's quelling their fears. It's like, don't worry, we're taking care of that. We're going to make sure that it's going to stay exactly the same, that you'll always be recognized. But these are the wrong tools. They're awful tools. And it's obviously, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, yes, I can imagine, because we knew that Legault would be that way from the moment he got elected. And that Bloc Québécois has been trying to do stuff like that so many times before because they want to talk to that base. And I feel from what I've expressed earlier that base is being cheated out of a true opportunity to find their footing and find their identity by doing these legislation that are so obviously against any common sense.
Mais là, tu parles d'identité et d'être fier d'être Québécois.
Yeah.
Moi aussi, je suis fier d'être Québécois.
Exactement.
Comment ça se fait que quand on parle de ces choses-là, je ne suis pas Québécois? Hein?
Exactement.
C'est ça la question. Ils cherchent quelque chose. Depuis qu'ils ont dit l'argent est vote ethnique, c'est clair que je ne suis pas Québécois. And it seems to me, why can't I come in the tent too? All I have to do is leave Quebec to realize I am a Quebecer, okay? As soon as I go to Toronto, honey, I know I'm a Quebecer, and I know there are things about being a Quebecer I want to keep, including the language.
Yeah.
Je suis assez fier de ça. Mais comment ça se fait qu'on fait cette discussion-là? C'est toujours de me mettre à part and making me the enemy.
Right.
What is that about?
Yeah, it's so obviously it's refusing to see the change and what you gain by changing C'est vraiment, il y a toute l'idée que il y a une espèce de mythologie qui s'installe autour de qu'est-ce que t'es, d'où est-ce que ton identité vient. Puis tu vas avoir ça, you're going to have that problem wherever you come from. You know, there's this mythology that you want to go back to. This it used to be great and we're going to go back to that. And it's a very human mindset. You know, it's a fear of the unknown, because what's going to happen in the future is unknown. So we might as well go back to something that's imperfect. But it's an instinct, and you have to fight against that instinct constantly. I guess this is where it comes back to. It comes down to, and what they're speaking to, what legislations like that are speaking to, ou quand justement t'as un parizeau qui va dire si c'était pas du vote ethnique puis du vote d'argent, you're saying to these people, you're saying to that very small base, you know, I heard you, and we're going to go back to something that's going to be more familiar with you. Give us the power. Because ultimately, what's happening there is that they want to get as many votes as possible, because we live in a democracy, imperfect as it be, and what they're trying to get is votes. So what we need to do as militants is to change that base. It's to get closer to that base and show people all the benefits we can gain from working together. And therefore, then the politics is going to go like, we don't have any choice but to change too. We don't have any choice but to put policies in line with what, you know, the people who have elected us asked us to do. And this is what happened with the CAC. You know, there was a pushback. People got scared. People got freaked out because they thought things were changing. And some media managed to convince them that it was changing for the worse, that they would disappear. And it's not true. It's not true. So this is where when I do theater, the people I'm speaking to is not necessarily the prime minister or, you know, the people making the policies. I'm speaking with the people that are in the room with me right now, and I'm reminding them that when you're gonna vote, and some far right governments is going to say like, well, we're going to try to find a solution to the indigenous problem. You'll know that it's not a problem. You'll be like, what problem? No, I've met them. I've laughed with them. I drank tea with them. No, I'm not going to vote for you. What are you talking about, you idiot? And the people who are trying to win votes with that argument will soon see that, oh yeah, no, that's not going to work. I'll have to change, you know, my you know, we'll have to change, or we'll have to find another leader for that party, because that's not going to float. See what I mean?
I do, but your lips to God's ears, you know, and you and folks speak, and I think, oh God, let them be true, let them be right, and my cynic self not be right about this stuff. So I want to just come back to one last question for all of you. The pandemic has had us shut in, has forced us to see the world in different ways. I want to know what you think the future looks like as a result of the pandemic. What impact do you think it's going to have on social justice development movement? Fo?
Well, first, the pandemic should really force us to review and reassess and redefine the place of senior citizens in our society. People who are old, people who are alone, people who live almost below the poverty or under the poverty line, people who are abandoned because of age, because of disability. And I think that's the most sacred obligation we have towards that most vulnerable segment of the population. Secondly, we have to reassess all these systemic inequalities, socioeconomic inequalities that we have seen how the virus really exposed over the last 2 years in terms of race, in terms of poverty, in terms of migration status, in terms of gender, and especially low-income families who are headed by women. I believe because in many communities, it's those women who work in the healthcare sector who are most vulnerable to infection and fatalities because of COVID-19, and we tend not to talk about them. Thirdly, I think we need to redefine, among other things, the way that very likely we organize our work, our employment system, our economic system. The whole notion of guaranteed annual income could come back. So there's a lot of things that we have to look at, but more on a more global basis. I think that this gives us a chance to review our place in the global village, because most Western nations have come to understand that to really fight this pandemic, the COVID-19, we have to promote, ensure the most accessible, shall we say, that greater access to healthcare and to vaccination in developing countries, where basically a lot of people don't have any basic, drinking water and other medical care, because as long as we don't have enough vaccination for the entire population of the planet Earth, this virus can come back to haunt many of us right here in our homes, right here in Montreal again. So those are the things that I think this pandemic has, shall we say, forced us to review. And it could be a very, very unique opportunity in the history of this 21st century. So we have to be, shall we say, much more visionary, much more creative, as you mentioned, much more resilient, but also much more human in the way that we look at ourselves and the people around us and around the world.
Nor, when we think about the pandemic, it's caused a lot of isolation, as Pho was saying. Chances are, my sense of it is this is not the last time we're going to have these kinds of things happen. And we've talked today about the importance of contact, of sharing, of seeing each other and being able to deal with it face to face. What do you think the lasting impact of the pandemic is going to be in the legal area?
It's such a big question, and it's a question that is still being asked and answered in the legal field. And honestly, sadly, it's still being, we're still talking about technicalities. Like, okay, we have to make the legal system like more informatic, and everything has to be informatic and blah, blah, blah. But there hasn't been a lot of question about the system in itself. And I think it's sad to see that the legal system in itself, has not been seeing like how much the pandemic has had consequences on the populations, on the infractions that are committed by people because of what has been happening in the last 2 years.
Charles, as artists, the pandemic really forced us to do some pivoting. We suddenly included Zoom in our practice and that kind of thing. When you look towards the future, what do you think we take from the pandemic that will strengthen us? And what do you think has come out of the pandemic in terms of weaknesses that have been uncovered in the arts?
Yeah, I'd say two weaknesses that are blatant is the fact that, and it stems from the fact that here in Canada and in Quebec, culture is not recognized as something essential. It's not in meaning in sense of essential workers like the people who worked in the hospital. That's not what I mean. But it's not essential for your identity. It's not essential for your well-being. Restaurants, yes. Having access to professional sports, yes, of course. Having access to SUVs, of course. It all goes without saying that it's so much fun and it makes your life so much better. But culture, not. Culture is not something that is going to make your life better. And I don't understand why this is not something that's in our mentality, whereas it's something that's super important in Europe, for example. And I'm talking about theater here, like more established. What we've went to an institution to learn more about and how to decolonize it as well, but that's a different subject. So how do we see ourselves, and how do we make sure that people understand that what we do is essential, is important, is something that is going to make their life better? That's the first thing. And second thing is how vulnerable we are to not just epidemics, but just funding cuts, where a lot of people all of a sudden don't have a job. We just don't get to work anymore. If we don't get to work, we don't get to participate in society in any way, whether it be by paying our taxes or by, contributing to the economy, even though I find that concept sometimes a bit, anyways, twisted up on its head. We don't get to spend money. But there's a certain precarity for people who work in that field that needs to be addressed. And that's why so many people are talking about, a minimum, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry.
I know what you're talking about.
The guaranteed annual income?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Which could be applied to so many other fields, could be applied universally and would actually benefit society. But that means a huge overhaul of how we think about, in terms of society, about how we treat each other and how we treat, our immediate neighbors. it requires of people to know that, you know, helping others and making sure that others are cared for is going to be of a benefit, direct benefit to you. Whereas people think like, no, if I have to pay more taxes to pay for that, I mean, I'll have less money to buy a bigger SUV. It's like, anyways.
Yeah.
Scrap that. Oh, I just meant to talk about, you know, how precarious we are in our field.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm hoping that, you know, coming out of this in terms of the arts in general, people discover just how dependent they are on the arts.
Yes.
And I hope that we will build on the momentum of that discovery, because they will forget real quick. So we can hopefully build on that. Folks, I want to thank you guys for coming out on a Friday afternoon and giving me this time to hang out with you all. This has been fun. I want to thank those who are joining us online and who will view this later on. If you have any comments or anything like that, please do get in touch with T3. They always love to hear from our audience. I want to thank the wonderful Zachary Couture for you know, putting all this together. I want to thank Dana Ray and all the other tech people who supported the production of these panels, because it takes love, you know, people behind the scenes to get this done, and they allowed me to just walk in and be the vedette for the day. So that's a lot of fun. And of course, at T3 Junior Theatre itself and its stalwart artistic director, Rahul Varma, for providing not only this platform for this afternoon, but access to artists of color, you know, differently able. I mean, there is one place in theater where everyone is welcome, and that is T3. And I'm not going to say it's the only place, but it's the place where my heart and soul lives on a constant, in a constant way, and thrives. Gives me hope about what can be done in this world called theater. Any last thoughts, folks?
Yes, I would like to thank all of you, particularly thank T3 Dunia for inviting me. I cannot leave this discussion without mentioning the fact that today is a very important day. This is the official Nelson Mandela Day in Quebec. It's officially designated by an act of the National Assembly, and I think Quebec is really like very progressive and very, very shall we say, amazing by recognizing this day, the day when the president, Mr. Mandela, was freed from the prison many years ago. And I think that this forum today reminds us again of the need to continue his vision, his ideals, and the principles, and his dream, so that we can live up to the legacy and to the expectations of Nelson Mandela. Thank you.
Thank you, Fo. Especially, it is something that is significant, the celebration. And it's important, especially given the history that Quebec played in the apartheid system, that coming full circle and supporting and celebrating Nelson is not just about them. It's about us also in our history and our connecting to that. So thank you for bringing that forward.
Actually, Montreal and Quebec were possibly the most active voices in the anti-apartheid movement in the 70s and the 80s. And Mr. Mandela visited Montreal for that reason in 1990. So I think we should keep that as part of Quebec national history. Thank you.
Yeah, oh, like I said, the only thing as long as we embed that with the understanding that when they were ready to set up the apartheid system, they came here and copied it from what we did with our native peoples, right? And that history, you know, if we're going to celebrate the advances, it's important to recognize our role in that history as well. But having had the opportunity to speak to Mr. Mandela, you know, and what he did in his lifetime, if you ever get the chance to visit Robben Island where he was held, it will change your life. Thank you, folks. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for giving me your Friday. And I wish you all the best and hope we get to do